Hey everyone! So today we have Ron Hetrick, Principal Economist at Lightcast, as well as author of The Rising Storm. Now, this episode, we're going to get really nerdy about data and data on the workforce. Where is it today? Where is it going? Now, let me put this into context. So we're sitting right now in Q2 of 2025, and to say that business is challenging for most is an understatement. So we spent the past 4 weeks across 5 different cities, 2 different countries, actually 4 different countries, and meeting with over 100 plus talent executives. And the number one insight is that even when it's good, meaning even if you're seeing 15% plus growth right now, it's still never been more challenging, and it's probably not going away. Now, the workforce is just one aspect of every company's strategy. You have to have the best product. You have to have the best brand. And the reality is that is literally just correlated to how good your talent is. And so talent, I always kind of say, it's kind of like water if you're a fish, meaning you know when you don't have it, but when things are going really right, no one looks at each other and says, wow, thank God we have the right talent strategy. But the reality is when things are going wrong, you're burnt out, you're not shipping what you need, you don't even know what you don't know because you don't have the right expertise. So in this episode, we're going to give you all of the data showing you how hard it is to get the right talent right now and how much you need to have alternative, modern, what we would call cloud-driven talent strategies. So enjoy this episode, and then most importantly, go drive some change. All right, Ron, I'm beyond excited for this. When did I reach out to you? 3 months ago? 4 months ago?
You're asking the wrong person.
Okay.
I had many people reaching out. I barely half the time even know what I'm doing. Why am I here?
So I reached out to you asking if you want to be part of my cult, and you said, no, I was kidding. But so I saw some of your data and went, oh my God, we need him on the podcast. And we recently looked through Storm, and we're going to put the link. Everyone better read it. And I'm going to read you kind of my big ahas just to get your reaction.
Oh.
But the first thing I'm going to ask, and so, Ron, you're going to have a big intro ahead of this, right? So the listeners already know, that you're the foremost expert when it comes to labor force data and staffing. So our listeners know that. But what the hell is in the water in Jacksonville and Tampa? Because why is every staffing related solution industry person, why are they all in Jacksonville or Tampa?
Yeah, it's interesting. It started, in my opinion, it started back when the mortgage thing happened, and we had, you have a state that's really growing. They were using, homes were really kind of exploding, and somehow you ended up with all of these banks kind of coming down here. And I think staffing, a lot of the people wanting to be around that, that's good money. You're making really good money per transaction, even if it was mortgage originators, loan originators. And then we went to loss mitigation. So you had to put those people to work, but that was good money. And I think industry follows, a money trail. And for sure in the past, 4 or 5 years, so much has moved to here, moved to the state of Florida, moved to the state of Texas. And I think a lot of people want to be where things are exploding, not where they're kind of ebbing. And I think we're in a position where there's a lot of excitement down here, a lot of people constantly moving in. Well, if you're thinking, I want to expand my business, you want to be where people are moving in, not moving out.
Exactly. So, okay, you just dovetailed perfectly. So let me transition into Storm. Okay. And for you listeners out there, and Ron, I actually have it so we can even, if you have any charts you want me to make sure I look at, I can share screen and have it open for you. The pod is visual. So for those out there, I think 20% of you are actually watching this. So you look good, by the way, Ron, you did your hair, look a lot better than me. Yeah, you look good. So the word or the name Storm, I would say somehow you found a way to actually understate it. And I want to give some context. So last week we were with a leader at NASA, and one of the questions we always have is, okay, what's the feedback loop from when a technology comes out to when a technology is actually painful, meaning if you don't embrace it, it's pain, right?
Oh.
And their answer was usually 8 to 10 years is the average, right? It might be more, it might be less,
Hmm.
but usually 8 to 10 years. When I looked at your report, part of what I was thinking was, ooh, yeah, 2016, like 2016 to 2018 was probably when a lot of this was really brewing.
Ooh, yeah.
And it seems like in the next 3 years is when, if you don't have a strategy for this, you're going to fall. Okay. So that's what
Yeah.
I kind of figured. And in true Florida fashion, the analogy I'm going to use is your subtitle should have been what happens if you only have beer in the fridge for a hurricane that knocks your roof off, right? Because that's part of what we're getting at. So
Hey.
let me name these out. What really jumped out at me.
Yeah.
The first thing was the labor force participation, right?
Yes.
That's consistent here and everywhere.
Yeah.
The second thing you called the silver tsunami,
Yeah.
which that was hilarious. I'm just imagining those silver hairs, and like silver foxes.
I'm getting.
I know. So that was hilarious. The 8-to-1 ratio.
It's actually more like 4-to-1 in the way that the math works. That was in the way that we first calculated. It was probably a little bit of apples to oranges. So I actually went back. We've adjusted that, but it's so funny because you go from obscene and oh my gosh, we're all going to die to okay, it's still pretty obscene and we're all going to be in a lot of trouble. So it doesn't change the narrative really. And I will tell you, there's stuff happening now, data points coming out, even in the past month, even in the past 2 weeks, where it is the evidence of the storm. We say in the paper, watch out, 27, 28, this is going to get really gnarly. However, as we point out in the paper, we are already starting to see an inversion in the native-born labor force. And you'd go, well, that's way ahead of when you predicted. And that all made sense. Or I'm sorry, it all wasn't clicking into place until about 2 weeks ago when the Congressional Budget Office released their new forward-looking population estimates and went from a native-born inversion in 2039 to a native-born inversion in 2032. So in 4 years, they moved up the inversion 7 years. Now, it's something I may or may not have spoken out in Storm.
Yeah.
But this always happens before people project it. Japan's drop in births are hitting numbers 4 years ahead of the schedule that they thought they were going to happen. When China's population inverted, that was about 4 years before they thought that inversion. It was about 2 to 4 years before they predicted that was actually going to happen.
And can you define what you mean by? Can you define it? What does labor inversion mean?
So we'll talk about population inversion and I'll move it to labor inversion. So population inversion literally means when you go from a growing to shrinking. Now, what I'm talking about here is native born. So if I remove foreign born, if I remove immigration, we're saying that they're saying that we're going to continue to grow as a population. That estimate goes to about 2050 or so. Okay. However, the native born population will start to go into a contraction around 2032. This is something I actually thought I could see coming, and I did actually think they were going to move those things up. For the labor force, think about this. Before you die, you usually retire, and then you have years that you are retired. So if you start to do the math and go, well, if the population, native-born population is going to invert in 2032, and I say that maybe the average age of people who are passing away is 80 years old, and yet they're retiring 10, 12 years before that, well, then it does make sense that since 2019, our labor force, our native-born labor force, has already started inverting as well.
Gotcha. Okay. So we're gonna double click in that a little. So let me go through some other ones. So sure. You also hit on AI, generative AI,
yes.
And there was a stat that 1/3 of customers believe AI will never empower engagement. Okay, so we're gonna hit on that. That's gonna have its own section, and then the last thing that you're probably gonna be like, why did you pick up on that? Okay, so out of this full, what was it, 80 pages? Like 60 to 80 pages.
We tried to make this one shorter. I don't know what they ended up. The editors ultimately got
it like
it down
60 to 80. So out of all these pages, I think this was page it was 2/3 through, and it was one little subsection. Okay, I'm going to give you a hint on what I'm going to talk about. Do you see those 4 photos up there? Not the one. I
see that you have 4 photos. That's about all I see.
Can you see what they are?
Mm-mm.
Okay. They are the original John Deere patent. Now, the reason I put that there is because I think the only real invention besides fire that's cool is the tractor. I think that because where I grew up, nothing made me happier than going to the farms and seeing the farmers eating the food straight from the farms.
Yeah.
There was a bullet related to Japan and the
Ooh.
urbanization.
Yeah.
You knew what you just walked into. So,
I love the Japan section.
yes. So that terrified me because, Ron, if you take my farms away, I'm going to go kicking and screaming. And so I can't wait to go deeper into that.
It's a great section. Hannah, my co-writer, she just crushed it. I basically said, like, here's what we're going for. We know we're not first. I've heard things, but I need somebody to just really buckle down and go, what can we learn from their inversion, which started in 2010?
Yeah.
I mean, they've been inverting for a long time. Their population's been shrinking. And I'm like, what can we learn? Because their age pyramid's much bigger. And that's what came out in that section. And it's an amazing section. Amazing.
So let me ask you, let's start this. I'm going to tell you what my main takeaway was, and then I'm going to ask you what your intended main takeaway was or what you want it to be.
Sure.
And then we're actually going to go in, when was it actually released and written, and what has changed, and did that make it stronger, weaker, what has kind of changed since then? So my main takeaway was that you can't hide from inversion, labor force participation rate shrinking. You can't hide from it. But we need to be a lot smarter. And
Right.
that smarter is actually going to be contextually dependent, depending on where your region, your industry, your skill set. So, for example, if you're sitting here in the US or you're sitting in Mexico, you might have two different strategies, but the pain is still the same. There's going to be labor inversion. And if you're sitting in, and here's one of my, second degree ones, if you're sitting in LATAM, if you're sitting in Southeast Asia, that means that there actually might be a market for you to provide talent. And, I kind of sit in like the flexible talent side, right? So if you're sitting in LATAM or sitting in Asia, how can you make money on what's happening in the US and what's happening in Europe? And
Sure.
it all comes back to this diminishing labor force participation. That was mine. What would you say your intended main takeaway was?
Starting with when I co-wrote Who's Going to Do the Work back in 22, I really felt that the emphasis of Storm had to be, if you have finite resources and you are trying to make sure that the country is taken care of, then you have to change the messaging that we have, because what we're really trying to point out in Storm, what been trying to point out since Drought, is we're a very, very educated country that's kind of become a little averse to the harder work that kind of keeps things moving, like producing food or building homes. And yet those are the very things that make an economy function. Like we always say, it's like, if all IT development stopped right now, if you never had another day of IT development from now until the end of human history, we would be just fine. But if food development stops, you're dead. And it's like, we have to make sure that the messaging that occurs from the top, of whether it's from the political side, from the company side, from parents to children, from friends to friends, the messaging has to be stop the stratification and start to look at these things and go, we have to make sure that the mouths to feed, meaning these different job categories, we have to make sure they're fed. We have to make sure that we understand what do these jobs pay? How can these jobs be made better if people don't want to do them? What is our dependency on immigration for those jobs? It is trying to put everything on the table to say, you have to keep your economy functioning. You have to make sure these kind of roles are filled. And we are not positioned for that. We are gaining an older labor force, but historically speaking, the jobs that these people do aren't typically the ones that kind of keep your economy running. Like, they're not going to build a home or necessarily work in a warehouse. Not saying it never happens, but painting in a broad brush, where we see these kind of critical gaps in healthcare and all these other things are typically filled by what we call the entering labor force, 16 to 24-year-olds. But that's a shrinking labor force. That's going away. So what are you going to do if that labor force that's going to take care of our aging population doesn't exist?
So let me actually, I want to pull up, and this is like, I'm just purely flirting right now, Ron, to be honest. So like, I want you listeners, even if you're driving, don't look at it. But like, if you're working out, make sure you look at my screen right now. this what would you call it? This graphic is incredible, right? And it's hitting on what you're talking about. So
Yeah.
if we look at the potential hurricane impact, it started with healthcare, right?
Yes.
So
Healthcare
okay,
is ground zero.
look at that pain, right? Look at that pain. And then you look to construction, look at that pain. And then you come down to IT and tech, right? You nailed it. And I will say, actually, let me ask you, does this explain why over the last year and a half, when shit got really hard, inflation went high, supply chains shrunk, like when shit got really hard,
Mm-hmm.
this was got what actually got impacted the most, right? In terms of tech company subscriptions stopped getting paid. Whereas, does this kind of explain that?
So let's look at this and what we're trying to do here. What we're saying is, in trying to get work done, what are your options? You have 4 options to get work done. Okay. You can hire locally, try to hire somebody because they have to be where you're at. So you're going to hire locally. You can do immigration. So we use immigrants to help do the work that we're trying to get done. You can globalize, meaning I can't really get this work done here. I'm going to push it out. I can push it out to Asia. I can push it out to Africa. I can push it out to other parts of the world. And then the last part is automation. So if all these human solutions don't work for me, maybe AI, maybe robotics can help with the labor problems I'm having. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the question has to be, how is work going to get done? So if you're going to end up in the Cat 5 category, healthcare, it's because your options, you can't globalize healthcare. You can't push like, oh, you need that surgery. Well, we're going to send you to Paraguay. That's not going to work, especially like an emergency room. Hey, AI and automation is something we talk about in the paper. It's cute. We love to talk about it in terms of what could do this. It could do this. But AI and automation is not being developed in a lot of the healthcare markets, not in a way that's going to alleviate the very significant issues we have, especially with nursing, or just the kind of people who have to walk into a room and look at somebody and go, whew, they don't look right. And machine's not going to pick up those things. People are like, well, it could. Yeah, it could. And it could be way after all of this stuff even gets past us. That is why when we look at these things, we look at IT and tech and we go, they're a Cat 1. I mean, they can do anything. I mean, if you really want to get work done, you open a remote job and you'll get 1,000 applicants in an hour. You could, if you say, well, I'm willing to consider the whole globe. I just need somebody who can code. Well, now all of India opens up to you. Those countries in South America, the former Soviet republics, can open up to you. There are so many options to get a worker to get work done. But the more that needs to be done in person by somebody with skill who is willing to put up with those working environments, the harder it's going to be for you to get work done. So that explains the Cat 5 industries of construction and healthcare. In person, this is not easy work, and you typically have to have some level of skill. You can't put anybody in there, to do drywall. If you've ever done drywall, which I'm the worst at, they have to be good at it. You don't just go, well, I'll just hire this person and they'll go in. So that is how we came up with that scale. It's your options to get work done. The less you have, the more severe this hurricane is going to be. If you have a lot of options, then if you do the right thing in the next couple of years, you should even barely feel a sprinkle.
Yeah. Yeah. And what were the 4 options again? So I got the globalized and AI, but what were the other 2?
Hiring locally. So we call it local workforce development, or immigration.
Gotcha. Or immigration. Okay. Now let's talk about when was this? When did you do the work of the report? Was it?
So Rising Storm was released around, I think, October of last year. So the writing of it actually was a bit compressed because I had already, we had written Demographic Drought back in 21, towards the end of 21. Who's going to do the work? I co-wrote that, came out towards the end of 22. And then there was a gap. Well, the world changed quite a bit because when we wrote Drought in 21, you're still coming out of the pandemic. The labor market indicators were really kind of wonky. We were tight. We were having to make some guesses about some things. Well, time went on and we could see the future so much more clearly. We could see the trend line starting to find their new home, so to speak, like labor force participation. Found a new home, way lower than what it had been. And once we had that narrative kind of locked into place, it was a matter of just putting that narrative over top of the original Drought narrative. So we actually used a lot of the original writing, especially in the beginning. But after that, it really is pretty much an entirely new paper from that point on, because there are things that were important in Drought. when we wrote the first article, but we realized that we were trying to solve the world's problems. And it's like, we're a labor data company. We need to talk about work. Like, let's talk about where this population's going, where this labor force is going, and go, how is that going to affect our ability to take care of ourselves? And that was the whole intent. So it actually coalesced pretty quickly, only a couple of months to write the whole thing.
And so let's get into the gotcha. And that's an impressive turnaround. I mean, hell, like book publishing, right? I think ours was written for 3 years up until 2019. Took a whole year just to get the printing presses ready.
I am a burst writer. I can write so much content. It's almost like if you've done the work, if you've done the research, your hands can't type fast enough for where your brain is thinking. And I run into that constantly where I'm just like, oh, that's a good idea. And I'm trying to type and eventually I go, okay, what was that idea? Darn it. And I just sit there like agonizing, like I had it. It was right there. And a lot of times I remember it and it goes down. Sometimes I forget it and I just get so mad. And then it comes to me in the middle of the night and I'm like, well, that's not going to help me.
Yeah, you need like a Neuralink, man. We need to get you actually plugged in where it's just thoughts. And
yeah,
then
right,
all of a sudden be like, my thoughts are too quick. But but what would you say? So what have been the most painful that you're seeing your executives and companies really, really finding painful? Because we can go over, I mean, like I mentioned, right? I mentioned the ones that hit me, but what are some of the top things that you've seen, executives just like freak out at? Like, oh my God, crap. Right? Yeah.
Boy, there's a lot. I think one of the big things for us is that if we look forward to 2032, and I tell you that of our net labor force growth, the vast majority of it, as we talk about the paper, they're projecting will be people over the age of 65. And I'm like, I challenge the executives when I speak in rooms, like, think about your labor force right now. How many people do you have that are even working that are over the age of 65? And then think about the kind of jobs that your company does, whether it's manufacturing, construction, office work, whatever. What jobs do you realistically think they could do? And I'm like, if the Bureau is saying that's where our labor force is going to grow, then that's the first moment where things start to go off the rails. And then we talk about the fact of, and I just put a post up on LinkedIn about this. If you take birth rate, the births, the actual births that happened, go back, 10, 15, 20 years, and we look at this thing going forward, we are about to go over a very significant cliff. So they've called this a demographic cliff. Right at the point where you're going to have the very last of the very large boomer group retiring, you're about to face a really unbelievable drop in births. So what happened is the last good year of births was 2008. Magical time, right before the housing bust. Okay? We're having babies. We're feeling good about life. Housing bust occurs. We stopped. And the birth rates really plummeted after that. Last year was the lowest birth rate we've ever had in U.S. history. So this is not something that's getting better. It's getting exponentially worse. So if you start to math that out, 2008 means they turned 16 last year, turning 17 this year. So if you think about those people, they're going to turn 18 next year. After that, we go straight down. So that's it. This is your last group. So whether you're a university, whether you're a company that seeks out young talent, maybe you feel like they're cheaper or you provide these opportunities, that population is going to start going away over the next couple of years. Another reason why we call it the rising storm, and we're saying the storm's really going to hit later. If you're feeling pain now, understand that these are outer bands. Like, we haven't hit the storm yet. The storm is when this math really, as they say, doesn't start mathing.
And let me ask you a question on that, because that makes it really tangible. So, last year that we're popping babies, people can actually afford houses. And I'll tell you what, Ron, by the way, we've been trying to afford a house for like 3 years now. And I'm just telling you, like, there's no way as of right now, there's right now they're not going to be having kids. But so, now hitting 16. So you have the drop off of just the volume of talent. Now, let me also throw some data at you and see what your take is. So, the volume is going to decrease. Well, based off of our data, the choice of how they want to work has shifted. And so over 50% of millennials are okay with, independent, self-employed, multiple client type working arrangements. Mm-hmm. The younger they get, the more they want that. So that's one is, this population, well, they might not choose, and I'm intentionally not saying want, because to me that's too fluffy, right? I hate when I see data that's like X percentage wants. I'm like, yeah, you know what I want? I want a house in the country. Guess what I
Yeah,
can't?
right.
I need to make money. But
I know.
so the younger generations are choosing to work in these flexible self-employment type arrangements. Okay, that's one piece of data to throw at you. The second one, though, what I want to throw at you is the last time, or the when you look at history, right? Not to get too geeky, but when things really change from when the worker actually has control, is when there's not that many of them. And so when the
Correct.
line is huge into the factory,
Hmm.
we're working for 10 hours a day every single day,
For nothing.
right? For nothing. When that line is short,
Yeah,
hey, guess what? We now have a lunch break, we have a
sure.
bonus. And so the line coming into the factory is tiny now. The preferences of those people in line is for self-employment and flexible arrangements. Ron, what's your take on that?
All right. So you said earlier I could show you a graph I wanted to.
Yes, yes. And you can
Okay,
click
what if
on.
I were to tell you
Yeah.
that the lines are going to be different and that some won't have any line at all and some are going to have a big line.
Tell me
And
more.
those lines are not what we've expected in the past. If we go
Ah,
back to 2019 and we fast forward to where we are now,
yeah.
the US labor force has netted growth of around 4 million, okay? Net growth. So we have more people now working than we did back in 2019 overall. Now, so another devil in these details. All of our net labor force growth are people with a college degree, 4-year degree.
This was one of this
So,
is different. Yep, yep.
so in order to math this correctly, you need a negative. So during this time, 2.5 million people who are only high school diploma or less are out now. They're gone. They're not in the labor force anymore. So either they got a degree and they now changed their classification, or they left the labor force. Either way, this is what we don't have. We don't have people who don't have college degrees. Boy, do we ever have people who have college degrees. And the reason why that matters is if we look at all of the job openings in our country right now, about 60% you don't need a college degree of any kind. And this will help you a ton. And I'm sharing some slides from my keynote deck, but they're just the most important part of this.
Yeah.
I'm actually trying to change slides on the wrong screen. There we go. All right.
There we go.
Of the top 10 most posted jobs in this country, only registered nurses requires a college degree. But that's only 4% of our college degrees. So everything else that we want, the things that keep your economy functioning, whether it's home health aides, retail sales, laborers, they don't need college degrees. They don't, in fact, almost all of them don't need a college degree of any kind. You don't even need an associate's degree. Truck driver, you at least need a CDL license. But for the most part, this is how your economy runs. These are the jobs you have to make sure are filled. This is what we're looking for in this country. But that is not at all what we're adding. We're only adding on the net people who have college degrees. So whether people say I'm inclined or I would like to do things where I have more control over my life, in my opinion, what they're saying is, yeah, I like this idea that I can, I want to be a on contract marketing person or an on contract designer or a programmer who basically does things when I feel like doing it. They're not talking about, oh, I can't wait to become a plumber or an HVAC technician. There are some that are saying that, but what happens is the anecdotes start to overwhelm the actual data. The data does not back it up. Now, another bomb to drop on this one, okay? And that is, hold on, I'm just going to get to the stop share. How do I do that?
Actually, I wonder if I.
Where is it?
No, it's all you, man. It's at the bottom.
It's on the bottom. I see.
I mean, these are beautiful
Stop.
slides.
There we go. Got it. Hey, all right, cool. All right. Another thing to think about when it comes to this is a couple years ago, they started noticing, they're like, wow, this was about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Community college enrollments really started going up. People are like, see, they're doing it. Like you're starting to see this transition away from the 4-year school. What we found out was these people were the ones who had come through the pandemic whose school grades were horrific. So the only option they had was community college. But when they actually interviewed them, or when they actually did their surveys, they found out all of them were like, well, I'm going to go to a 4-year school. I just can't get in right now. So I'm like this big wave that people couldn't wait to jump on and be like, see, attitudes are changing. They do want to do these things. These kids are like, no, I don't. I just can't get in yet, but I'm going to eventually go. And the data that we have clearly backs that up. College enrollments have stayed around 61, 62%, which means 2/3 out of every graduating high school senior immediately enrolls. And a lot of people love to say things like, yeah, but they don't all finish and everything.
Yeah.
Well, the data kind of shows us when we're looking at the labor force. Another stat that I think we share in the slide deck is this one. Also very important. When you look at the US labor force, the largest part of our labor force, it's not even close, are people that have a 4-year degree, 65 million. I mean, this is hands down the big dog. If you are trying to analyze what do we have in the US labor force, it's college degree people. That's what we're good at. People with associate's degree, that's another 36 million. This represents the very vast majority of what we've got. And then you have a much smaller number on the left side, which are people who only have a high school diploma or less. So as I start to talk about, well, okay, that's not good if we're saying, look, I need construction workers, or I need people to work in the agriculture industry, or I need these people to do these things because that's what keeps your country functioning. Well, then you go, well, they're going to have to pick from that side on the left. And then you go, and the craziest thing we've ever seen is people are like, I feel like we should drop our college degree requirements. It's going to open up the talent pool. And I'm like, hold on. Why would you do that? You actually have access to the biggest talent pool. And by the way, they're all clamoring for opportunities. And they have massive college debt that they're trying to pay back. And so the one thing that they use to separate themselves away to hopefully give themselves a better opportunity, you're now removing that from them. Now they didn't even have to go to school. Well, they've already accumulated this debt. It's unbelievable. And it's like these kind of things that we're doing are done with the best of intentions, people with very pure hearts who have absolutely no idea what the data actually says. Because the data is showing us something very, very different. And some people will say, well, we're doing it, to help, our diversity hiring. Well, if that's the case, then it's such a slap in the face to the people who may have come from disadvantaged communities who fought and killed and did everything they could to get a college degree. And now you're like, no, I don't recognize that anymore. I don't value that. I'm opening this thing up to everybody. And I'm like, once again, the heart is pure. But you're doing this without fully understanding what the data says. And that's really the point of Storm, is to say, we have to open our eyes. We have to see who we are. We have to take stock of what we have. We have to see where we have gaps of people we could take advantage of, where we don't have gaps. And we have to figure out ways of solving those problems.
That makes total sense. Yeah. So if I'm wrong in summarizing it this way, but the metric of college degree, good in intention, wrong as an absolute, added by, and I'm going to sound like a software nerd now, added by just blatant recursion, meaning that you set up this process and you just lose control, and it goes from being able to measure it to now it's just the way we've programmed society to be, right, all around this wrong metric, right? Yeah. So if recursion didn't go nuts, then we could look at it 15 years later and go, ooh, yeah, we probably shouldn't have pushed it so hard. But now,
boom, there's
an infrastructure around it, and all of a sudden millions are going to lose jobs if we admit that, okay, we might have picked the wrong metric. Now, let me ask you, is this consistent across other countries? Is it just a U.S. problem? What is the global impact of this?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating thing. I believe we talked about this in Who's Going to Do the Work. I call it the class society that we have in the U.S., where we have unwittingly or intentionally created, almost this class system of saying, oh, you didn't go to college. My child, they're not going to college. And then they immediately apologize for it. They think they're going to go eventually and everything. And I'm always like, stop apologizing. Like, we actually need these people more than we need the other ones. So it's the reason it's different here is that there's an esteem that has occurred in the U.S. that's very different. In Europe, for example, the trades are usually passed down through families. So your great grandfather was a bricklayer, your grandfather, your father, all his children, daughters and sons, they're bricklayers. And it's considered to be, that's awesome. Like that, you are proud of your profession. It may just have to do with the history of those countries. It could do with other things. My guess is it's America's very high reliance as income as a basis of judgment. Well, if you make a lot more, then you must be way more important. And I think that is the thing of, it's very unique to us. Some of the Asian countries have that, but it's very interesting. If you were to go to Japan, for example, and you were to compare what a mechanical engineer makes versus what a person in fast food makes, the multiple between them is much, much smaller than what you see in the US.
Yeah.
So in Japan, a mechanical engineer is going to make, maybe 2 times more, 3 times more than somebody who works in fast food. In the US, it could be 10 times more. And it's just in the way that these things have happened over time. But you don't, it's like a journey to a place is never done with a step. And as you said, we spent 30 years telling everybody going to school or high school, what are you doing to get into college? Are you taking AP classes? When I went to high school way back, and at times that we don't want to talk about, AP at that time was a thought concept. It hadn't been realized. It's now not only been realized, but there's other classes outside of AP where we now say, are you doing this? Are you doing that? And guidance counselors are hammering children over the head with, you're failing with this. How are you going to get into these schools? Versus presenting the plethora of options available to people, being honest with them about the earnings potential, about the fact that at 25, they won't have any student debt. They're going to be making this if they go into the electrician route. They will always be ahead of a person who gets a degree that maybe doesn't compensate that well. It's like, we have got to change the messaging. And I'm not saying in doing this, you're not insulting people who have a college degree. I have one. My kids have them. Like, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it's the stratification that is occurring that's really destructive. And it's a very, very specific thing to us.
Well, I'll be the first to tell you, my undergrad was the biggest waste of time. I majored in accounting and finance. So it was it was a hard skill. It was what I was told to go at. And it was just the biggest waste of time. I literally never use it. And I probably could have taken one accounting course and one finance course, and that would have been good enough for what I do. But the school pushed very, very hard. Okay, go to high school and then get the internship, whatever. Now, I did go to grad school at a place that rather than saying, what's your major, said, what impact do you want to make? And let's put all the resources around that. Now, Ron, why was that the case? Because it was a very rich school. And so it took on a lot of debt to go, and there was a lot of business owners. So that's why I was able to hear that. Now, to your point on what's different in Europe, which is a really good analysis. And I think I've told you. So I lived in Asia for a while, right? So I lived in Singapore for a while. Yeah. And Europe, your last name determines. So what's the name Smith relate to? Well, obviously you
Smith,
are Smith, right? I'm going to show you a quick book, and this is to me why I think in America it's different. But so, do you see the title of this book? We're fucking Puritans, Ron. So at our core, we're the most capitalist country in the world, which as an American that's lived outside, I'm really damn proud of it because it's the land of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Now, the bad thing is us and I do have some Mayflower back. So us Puritans did believe, how do you know if someone's going to heaven? The more money they have, the more likely they are, right? And so in a college degree was a way to signal that. Now it's totally different. And I will.
It's changing, yeah.
Here's one of the thoughts and that I want to get your quick take on is, okay, that makes sense for the past 50 years. In my line, when you look at talent platforms, what they do is they replace a degree with some sort of meritocracy certification. That might be the number of projects you did. That might be the number of review, right?
The right wording of your skill sets.
The right wording. Yeah, exactly. And so it does start to, I don't want to say replace, but it does start to go beyond, hey, I went to, X Ivy League school, right? Name your Ivy League school. Now, do you see though, what have been some of the solutions that you are seeing countries either have implemented prior, and this might be where we talk about Japan, but what worked, right? What has worked to get out of this funk? And I'm thinking both at the country level and the business owner level.
So Japan's not going to be a great example of this. I think the way they're kind of solving this is they look at, hey, if it doesn't have to be done in Japan, we talk about in the Japanese section. Well, one of the things we talk about, and we'll get to the big takeaway, but I'm not going to go to the big takeaway yet. We'll talk about that at the end. What is one of the things they're doing? So Japan looked at everything and said, look, we really probably don't need manufacturing here. Like, let's get rid of as much of this as we possibly can, because we can always have goods brought to us. We don't have to consume our labor force making goods that we can just have sent in. The service occupations like healthcare, let's start talking about immigration. And if you know Japan at all, And as somebody always talk about when I present, up to about 2 years ago, Japan was not an immigration country. I mean, it's harsh. And I can say it in the kindest of terms, they just weren't very favorable towards it. That has changed. And I have been told by numerous people, trust me, it has changed. Like, they get it. They know that if they, without them, they have people lined up in the hospitals. There's no one to take care of them. And what happens is, in a culture like that, it's a trap. So what Japan keeps saying, well, we want to have more babies. But who traditionally does some of these jobs like nursing? It tends to be women. Well, you already don't have enough people in your labor force. You have an aging population. Who absolutely cannot take off work to have a child? A woman. They're absolutely needed. You cannot have them not doing this work. So the government will tell everybody, we'll pay, we'll do whatever, like have children. And these women are like, you're kidding, right? Like, I'm just came off 80 hours a week. Like, I'm dying. Like, I can't leave. Holy cow. Like, we're really getting crushed. And so that's why this is like a death spiral. But I digress. So when you start to look at this holistically, you do start to see the same patterns emerging in the US. And that was the big takeaway in Japan is, people do work longer. But it doesn't mean that they're doing labor intensive jobs. They're doing very easy jobs. That's our big takeaway from that section is, yes, they work into their 80s there. No one would in the US would ever do that here. Very few people will. But the reality is that kind of work is not kind of critical infrastructure type of work, typically. So what you have to do is say, how do you create a flatter environment? So whether intentionally or not, this is what I was talking about before, the salaries are much flatter. Japan has always done a really good job of saying, we're not going to have these kind of ultra rich occupations. There may be some ultra rich business owners, but as far as the occupations are concerned, an IT developer is not going to make that much more than another person, because if they do, you won't be able to eat anymore. So we have to make sure that these occupations don't get too out of control. So there's almost like a tacit understanding about that. If you research wages over in Japan. That is one way you keep labor kind of stratified. I would say it's true in Japan, just like it is in other things, where there's still family legacy. And you see this in a lot of Southeast Asian cultures. There's still family legacy. There's still pride in, hey, my parents did this and I do this. In America, there's a lot of, I didn't do all of this so that you wouldn't go to college.
Exactly. It's the exact opposite.
And that is once again, we're back in America again. This is an American thing. Like, it's the land of opportunity. I came here, I killed myself, I did all of this stuff. I'll be damned if you're not going to go to college. Yep. But that's really specific to us. You don't see that kind of like glowing pride in a lot of other nations that you see, like, oh, the first one in our family to go to college. In a lot of these countries, it's like, well, they went to college or they didn't go to college or whatever. It's a strange byproduct of what we value, and what we value is separation, making sure you're better. We love to compare ourselves to others. Am I making more? Here's where I am in my career. Am I outdoing this person over here? You don't see that as much in a lot of other societies, of this need to comparatively see yourself as better. And that creates a stratification system that says, if you go into certain occupations, you're a loser. And you're like, well, that occupation makes more than you do. I don't care. They didn't go through what they didn't go and sit in a university for 4 years, shelling out an enormous amount of cash. So therefore I'm better. And it's like, well, you're poorer. But yeah, I mean, I guess see where you're going. I got to make sure in all of this, the point isn't to tear something down and build something up. The point of it is, we should have never done, this esteem mentality is a very dangerous mentality. All jobs are important. If you don't believe me, the next time you need fast food because you want food fast, and you go and you realize the person taking your order at the window is now going back and making your food and it's taking a lot longer, all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, I am glad this person is here. I don't know the conditions of their life, their background story, all of these kind of things that put them in here at this moment. I am just so incredibly thankful that they are here.
Yeah.
Because they're way more important to me than some, app developer for my phone. I got too many apps to begin with, or a person on yet another accountant or something like that. They're meeting a need of yours in the time. And I think that this is just that, we've learned over the years, appreciate the healthcare professions back during the pandemic. Hey, appreciate your teachers and everything like that. And we love to have these initiatives. These people, hey, fire and rescue, they're our heroes. stop. All
Yeah.
jobs, except for maybe telesolicitors, are important. We have to get this mentality of jobs that keep society functioning are all great. Stop elevating some. Stop calling people heroes. Like, cut it out.
Yeah.
The work that people do is important, and we have to recognize that on this equal basis.
Yeah. So my last question for you is going to be what can executives do about this, right? But let
Yeah.
me add some context to exactly what you just said. So I fully agree with you on the STEAM portion of it.
Yeah.
Now here's where my American's going to come out. How can we use that as a strength? Because when I look at the world right now, only one country. What was the start? Let me just look it up real quick. What was the Stargate? Was it 500 billion or 500 million?
I don't know.
Let me look it up real quick. So I want to make sure I get this number right. So, to my knowledge, we're the only country in the world, yes, that in one day could get a $500 billion investment into building out the future of AI in less than 24 hours. That's not happening in Spain, France. Listen, Paris has much more beautiful architecture and everything. The food's so much better. They're not getting $500 billion to do that. So there is something unique about whatever the hell we have that's able to get $500 billion in 24 hours. That's pretty incredible. Now, we picked the wrong metric. We over-succeeded on that wrong metric. And we're now dealing with the side effects of the fact that we way overdid it on having way too many college degrees and way too little what I'm just going to call real work qualifications.
The support occupations, think about this. AI is exploding, right? And you're like, well, I want these companies to be here. We want AI farms. Like, we want the utilities things to do these things. And we want to attract these high-end jobs. Okay, cool. You want to attract high-end jobs. Where are they going to live? Who's going to take care of them? Who's feeding them? Oh, well, it's a multiplier effect. So anything you bring in, whether you're Disney or, John Deere or whoever, you build something and then everybody else has to come in around it and support it. Okay, cool. Those jobs that actually feed those people and everything, I'm concerned about those jobs. You'll staff as long as you don't need, the semiconductor thing is a joke because we don't have skilled trades to begin with. And now we want to hire a bunch of skilled trades people. So that's never going to happen. But let's say that this is more data stuff where there's more data engineers and the like that. We have engineers. So let's say we do that. But what is it? How are you going to provide for these people? The point that we go into great depth in the paper is that in the past, we've done nothing but use immigration to do that. Like, we keep pushing this work. And eventually you go, well, all that's left to do this are not our children, somebody else's children. So I didn't raise my children so that they could be a service worker. I will bring in somebody from another country and do that. And now the problem with it, as we're finding out now, is immigration is subject to political whimsy. It's a shame that it is. As I always say, it's a strategic asset, but we treat it politically. Well, because of that, it's a very you can't depend on it, because at any given time it can fluctuate greatly. So how is an executive supposed to plan for those kind of things? I think that, as if I'm an executive, I'm looking at this body of work and I'm looking at all these things. The one thing, the first thing I would jump away from is you're going to have a lot of leverage when it comes to a lot of what I call mid-level college degree type of jobs. Like, don't be so quick to jump to the big pay rate. I see a lot of people this year saying, I'd love to quit my job and I'm going to get better pay. And I'm like, you may not do that. You may be glad you have a job. Like, let's work with that part first. Yeah. Well, this is the difference of who saw the largest pay equity. I mean, we saw that initial explosion. You are correct. In 21 and 22, and I've written extensively about the private equity market and how that caused this fever pitch of trying to hire IT workers, because all of these companies were getting record sums of venture capital money. They had to do turnaround product quick. They went crazy and hired developers for way more than they probably should have. And then in an instant, all that private equity money vanishes and all of that stuff is gone. Yep. And as far as I'm concerned, that will never, ever happen again. It was a product of injecting an enormous amount of capital into the market that got pushed into that sector and then kind of came out. And now we're back. If you look at money supply, it's back to its long-term trend. Yeah. So let's remove that away from the equation, and we go, okay, because of AI, because of globalization, and everything, there is just in what those companies should have learned in that short burst of time, they have many, many options to keep the price low. They have a lot more bargaining power. If you're not utilizing that bargaining power, I think you're foolish, because you probably have way more bargaining power than what you think. I wouldn't be afraid if you have, some of your people going, I'm going to quit or I'm going to do this. Like, look, I can probably replace you. Where this changes is in communities and economic development and things like that. When you're bringing in industries, if you're bringing in higher end industries, then you have to think about, well, what's the demand they're going to put on the infrastructure? If you're bringing in industries that are sub $25 an hour, like a Buc-ee's or a Walmart Supercenter or something like that, that's going to consume a lot of your sub $25 an hour labor. Well, do you have that? You have a lot of those people sitting around going, I wish I had a job, or in some of the places I've been to, they have 3% unemployment rates. I'm like, these people are already working. Like, they're just going to steal from the other companies that are already in your market. Are your other companies okay with this? Or did you talk to them about it? Or are you just growing willy-nilly? So I think that there just needs to be more kind of holistic analyzing of what do we have in this market? What's our labor force have? What is it that we would like to do in this market? What's our risk going into the future? We have something here at Lightcast called workforce risk. Like, when we're looking at the occupations we want to hire and where we're trying to go over the next several years, like, are we going to be able to pull this off? Or are we going to be in a constant battle, seeing pay rate inflation all the time? It's just understanding, educating yourself onto which occupations are out there, plentiful, likely to be way more plentiful. Which ones are already not very plentiful and are looking in really bad situations, going forward, and then plan your business accordingly. This comes down to one final big takeaway for me, and that is, the days of saying we grew 5%, we're going to grow 10%. We grew 10%, we're going to grow 15%. At the beginning of this, I talked about population and labor force inversion. That's consumer inversion. How can I generate more product if I don't have a buyer for the product? And there's a lot of products that are consumed locally. So this concept of you can continue to do exponential growth, that the market will continue to do exponential growth, was built on a never-ending history of exponential population growth. But now, most developed nations in the world have begun their inversion or are close to it or will begin their inversion in the next decade, including the US. So the way that we've thought about business and the way we've thought about these kind of things, you are now going to have a finite resource called labor. And you're going to, if you want to continue to expand, then you're going to be requiring the rest of these other industries to die. And what if they don't die? Now, what are you going to do?
I love the just honestly, just bluntly stating, you are now going to have a finite resource. And I think my big takeaway from this episode is, the way that I interpret what you'd said was, you need to strategically invest in workforce planning. And that is one of the key pillars of growth. So it's no longer how many people are in that population, what's the CAC, right? What's the cost of acquisition, and just go, go, go. You now have to incorporate the strategic workforce planning of who's actually going to do the work and how are we going to do this sustainably. And listen, there's numerous examples of not doing it sustainably. To your point, overhiring, right? Potentially underhiring. One of the big things that we've heard, which, one of the most exciting areas we're seeing is frontline workforce talent platforms. That wasn't the case 5 years ago. It was Amazon and big companies that could leverage data analytics and leverage really digital tools to scale up and down their own workforce. And the mid to smalls were just kind of stuck with what was left. And now we are seeing these talent platforms that are literally taking the Amazon data analytic capabilities of being able to scale up and down with your workforce and saying, we have this for you. And guess what? It's also an independent workforce. So they're not on your books.
Yeah, right.
And you can scale up and down, right? So we're seeing some creative stuff, but you have to strategically invest in workforce planning, just like every other aspect of growth. It's no longer just throw it to the HR team. So listen, Ron, I mean, this has been beyond fascinating. I think you're going to get a lot of listeners that's going to be going to the report. We're going to make sure we link it. Probably the most important question for you, Ron, is where can our listeners find you? And what do you want them to do? Do you want them to all read Storm? Do you want them to reach out to you? Where can they find you and what do you want them to do?
Well, Storm is already the most downloaded piece that we've ever had in Lightcast. We also did a Spotify version. So if you are like, look, I don't like to read, but I love listening to podcasts like this one, you can go onto Spotify, look up The Rising Storm. It's a 4-part series. None of them are that long. You can make it through. We're reading the paper to you. We're doing that heavy lifting. But I think getting the article, seeing the charts really are going to help. I can't tell you people enough. I am a fun follow on LinkedIn. Once again, it's kind of stream of consciousness. If something hits me, or if something's happening politically, or something's happening where somebody throws something out there, a lot of times if it's of interest to me, I'll actually go in and dig out the numbers, and I'll try to see, hey, I think we're missing this with this, or they've made this statement, but are you aware that this is the numbers and this is what's actually happening? That's been an explosive area for me of the past couple of years. My follower count has gotten a little unruly. It's big. But I love that it's easy to serve a lot of people something very quickly when you're in one place and everything. So definitely read Rising Storm. Follow me on LinkedIn if you like to nerd out to kind of interesting economic phenomenon. Otherwise, that's about probably the only options I'm going to give you. I'm not going to give you my email.
Brian, can you please give your address and your home phone number?
Yeah, exactly. Where do you live and what times do you go to bed? Yes.
Social Security number preferred. Listen, Ron, this was an absolute blast. First of many. Thank you so much for hopping on.
Sure thing. No problem. Enjoyed it, Matthew.